Some of you older comic book readers may recognize this from a time when comics were available at the corner store and cost as little as 10 cents. These days, comic books are a multi-million-dollar business catering to a much older and largely male crowd. Ben Avery is trying to change all of that. He's co-founder and editor-in-chief of Community Comics.
We're a Christian comic studio, and all the people who are working on Community Comics projects, we're doing family-friendly Christian projects that are, not just action-adventure, but there's stuff behind it. There's a spiritual meat behind it, and we want to, encourage young Christians to, be a hero, but be a real hero. We want to encourage and maybe explain our faith to people who don't know about it.
Founded in 2001, Community Comics has 4 other members: design director Sherwin Schwartzrock, managing editor Bud Rogers, art director Darren Brady, and web designer Marshall Johnson.
It's not just a bunch of guys who are artists and writers getting together to do cool stories. It's a bunch of artists and writers getting together to do cool stories, but we also are Christians. One day for Halloween, we were thinking we should do a comic book that can be given out at Halloween with the candy. It grew from little projects that were basically, I call them Kinko's projects, that we photocopied on our own. And as our ambitions grew, the projects grew, and so we started doing some print on demand and self-publishing, and then some of our stories got noticed by the right people, I guess.
And by right people, he means comic mega house Marvel Comics and Christian publisher Zondervan. But Avery isn't what you typically think of when you think of comics. For one thing, he doesn't draw, he writes.
It's a lot like writing a play or writing a screenplay. The difference is, instead of telling an actor what to do and giving the actor the lines, you're telling the artist what to put on the page. That's the way they used to do it with like the old Marvel comics, is they'd have the artist and he'd draw the page out. The writer would say, I want a story about a giant monster that goes down, does this, and then the artist would draw that out, and then the writer would come back and write in all the dialogue and write all the captions and everything like that. Generally, the projects I've worked on haven't been like that.
While not all of his work is faith-based, he won't take a job he's uncomfortable with.
My faith is so much of who I am. I mean, even the secular comics work that I do, like I said, it may not mention Jesus. It may not even, there's no Bible verses in there or anything like that, But, it's who I am. This is what I'm interested in. I like fantasy, I like superheroes, and so the stories that I come up with, generally speaking, have those exciting qualities, but then at the same time, because my faith is so much of who I am, it's there as well.
Avery's biggest inspiration is his children, but these days, he says, a lot of comics aren't for kids anymore.
They're for teenagers. They're for 30-year-old fans who remember reading, Spider-Man when they were a kid, and they've kept collecting since then. And so now they're telling stories that are not, they're not for little kids. And I wanted to do some stories that my son, I could feel comfortable just handing to him and know, it's safe. So I want stories that my kids can read, and stories that are going to give my kids the messages, like about sacrifice and about heroism, but that have truth in it.
With that in mind, Community Comics has a variety of comics for readers of all ages. There's Timeflies for preteen readers.
It's about time-traveling flies. It's about these flies who they kidnap this girl. Her name's Laurel Templeton, and they take her with them on their cross-time journey. They're trying to rescue scientists who are being kidnapped through all of time, and one of the scientists is her dad.
There's also Armor Quest, which is action-packed and for teenage readers.
It's essentially taking Ephesians 6, the armor of God, and putting it into like a Lord of the Rings or a Narnia type of story. And it follows this character, Timothy, as he is accumulating the different pieces of armor.
And Tempest, a story about Hurricane Katrina geared toward an adult audience.
It was right after Katrina, and we wanted to do a project that we could actually, make a profit and give the profits to Salvation Army. It's just one of my favorites that I've ever worked on, and one of the reasons is because it is kind of a call to action, not just to to sit back and, when something like Katrina happens. If only it was that easy. If only...
Daddy, what's this? In the newspaper, what is this?
He shouldn't be looking at that. Some of those pictures... Oh, that! Good. Good. Some of the other images. I thought... Good. That's a rescue helicopter, son.
You mean like rescue heroes would use?
Yeah, something like that.
I want to be a rescue hero and fly a helicopter and help people.
Avery is driven by his love for storytelling. He also says comics, though unorthodox, can be a tool for ministry. ArmorQuest is meant to where you could sit down and actually use it as a Bible study. When it's done, it's something that you can sit down and say, okay, so in Ephesians 6 it says that the Word of God is a sword. Well, what does that mean? And when you see the characters using a sword, how do you use a sword? And so why would he call the Bible a sword? Going through just all the different pieces of armor and getting into those ideas of what they're good for and seeing it used on the page, and then helping in that way, hopefully teaching a little bit about the allegory from Ephesians 6. Avery says stories are powerful and parents should know what their children are getting into. I know that comics seem like a kiddie thing, and so for a dad to sit down, I'm a geeky dad, so I do that anyway. But for a dad to sit down and look at and read a comic book, it feels beneath them maybe. But you need to know what's going into your kid's mind. I gave Timeflies away to some people at some conventions. When I gave it to a kid, I always told the parent, go ahead and read it with them, because there's some spiritual stuff in there too. The triumph of good over evil is a recurring theme in most comic books. Avery believes this theme traces back to one story. We want to see heroes who help people. We want to see heroes who protect people. We want to see heroes who sacrifice. And that, I think, is ingrained in humanity. And it comes from the actual truth. These stories are all lies. They're all lies. But they point to, the real hero. And the things Jesus did are so much greater than anything Superman has done. We are drawn to those stories because of the reality of Christ. Despite this, he says most Christians don't even know there's a market for faith-based comic books. Part of the response has just been lukewarm, and part of that is just because people don't know about it. People say, oh, there's Christian comic books, that kind of thing. It's hard because, we don't have a lot of funds to spend on things, so we have to do a lot of grassroots type of promotion and just getting the word out. Avery admits becoming a millionaire scripting comics is uncommon, and even getting into the industry can be tough. So what's his advice? Get a friend who can draw and do it. I was a high school teacher. Right now I work for a company in Minneapolis that actually, because of Sherwin, my partner, that's how I got connected with them. And I write for them. And that actually is a salaried position. It's a tough market, but Avery remains passionate about his work. My biggest hope is that even in reading some of the comics that may not even have that Christian label to it, but that when they're done reading it, if nothing else, they know a little bit more about the relationship between humanity and God, and know a little bit more about who Christ is. That would be my hope. So the next time you go looking for your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, ask about faith-friendly comics. You may be in for a surprise. For more information and links to community comics, visit crossroads.ca. For 100 Huntley Street, I'm Bridget Antwi.